The Yellow Sea sits between the Korean peninsula and the eastern coast of China like a shallow, contested basin that has never fully decided which century it belongs to. Its average depth is less than 150 feet across most of its expanse, shallow enough to make submarine operations complicated, shallow enough to make acoustic propagation unpredictable, shallow enough that a vessel operating in its central corridor can be tracked by shore-based radar systems on both coastlines simultaneously, without either tracking station needing exceptional equipment. It is a waterway that offers almost no concealment to any vessel larger than a fishing boat. And yet, it is also a waterway where the rules of engagement, the legal frameworks, and the escalation thresholds are sufficiently ambiguous that a confrontation there can develop in ways that no playbook fully anticipated. On the morning that the USNS Ocean Surveillance vessel began its intelligence collection tasking in the international waters of the central Yellow Sea, all of those characteristics were simultaneously relevant. The vessel had been operating in the area for 11 days. Its mission was not classified in the sense that its presence or its general purpose required concealment. The United States government publishes the existence of its ocean surveillance program and the general capabilities of the ships that execute it. What the vessel was specifically collecting in this particular operating area on this particular day was a product of the geopolitical situation that had developed over the preceding 72 hours. 3 days earlier, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea had conducted what its state media described as a successful test of a solid-fueled intermediate-range ballistic missile from a mobile launcher positioned somewhere in North Hamgyong province. The test had been detected at launch by U.S. space-based infrared system sensors, tracked throughout its flight by shore-based AN/TPY-2 radars operating from sites in Japan and South Korea, and splashed by recovery assets that established its final impact point in the Sea of Japan, approximately 1,100 kilometers from its launch origin. The test had been condemned by the UN Security Council within 18 hours. The condemnation had been dismissed by Pyongyang's foreign ministry within 4 hours of the UN statement. The ocean surveillance vessel was in the Yellow Sea to listen. Its towed array sonar system, a passive acoustic collection capability that trailed behind the vessel on a cable several hundred yards in length, sampling the underwater acoustic environment with a sensitivity that could classify a submerged contact by the specific harmonic signature of its propulsion plant. From distances that would surprise anyone who had not studied the physics of low-frequency sound propagation in shallow water, was configured for collection against the acoustic signatures associated with submarine activity in the Korean People's Army Naval Force's West Sea Fleet. The KPA Naval Force operates a significant inventory of Romeo-class and Whiskey-class submarines out of its West Coast bases at Nampo and Pipagod. And following a ballistic missile test of the magnitude just conducted, the operational pattern of those submarines in the hours immediately afterward was itself an intelligence product of considerable value. A submarine that moves after a missile test tells you something. A submarine that does not move tells you something different but equally important. The vessel's commanding officer had been tracking the surface picture with the particular attention that the Yellow Sea's operating environment demanded since the previous evening. The KPA Navy's West Coast patrol assets, a mix of Osa-class missile boats, Soju-class coastal patrol vessels, and the larger Najin-class frigates that constituted the heavier end of the West Coast Fleet's surface combatant inventory, had been running elevated activity levels for 36 hours. Not the frantic, disorganized activity of a force responding to an unexpected crisis. The measured, patterned activity of units executing a prepared operational plan. Patrol sectors that had previously been covered by a single vessel were now being covered by two. Radar emissions that had previously been intermittent were now continuous. The electronic picture had shifted from background noise to purposeful signal. At 7:44 a.m., the first surface contact appeared on the ocean surveillance vessel's radar. Bearing 12 degrees, range 19 nautical miles. Speed 28 knots. Heading southwest. The radar cross-section and speed signature resolved to a confident classification within 3 minutes. Osa-II class missile boat. KPA Navy. armed with 4 P-15 Termit anti-ship missiles in above-deck launchers that were visible on the vessel's radar return at close range as prominent structural features. The contact was designated Track Alpha. Track Alpha was not alone. At 7:47 a.m., a second contact appeared at bearing 041 degrees, range 24 nautical miles. Same speed profile. Classification, second Osa-II. Track Bravo. At 7:49 a.m., a third contact appeared at bearing 359 degrees, range 31 nautical miles. This contact was larger, slower, and carried a radar return consistent with a Soju-class coastal patrol vessel. Track Charlie. The three contacts were arrayed across the northern and northeastern approach vectors to the ocean surveillance vessel's current operating position, and their headings, projected forward at current speeds, placed all three on converging courses with the vessel's position within 40 to 50 minutes. The commanding officer had the watch team at elevated readiness by 7:50 a.m. The vessel had no organic offensive weapons. Its defensive capability consisted of a single 25mm cannon mount and an inventory of decoy systems, and the commanding officer was under no illusions that either of those constituted meaningful protection against the missile loadout that 3 KPA Navy surface combatants could bring to bear at engagement range. What the vessel had instead of firepower was its communications suite, its intelligence collection capability, its legal status in international waters, and the standing arrangement under which its operating area was within the protective umbrella of the U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet assets operating in the region. The commanding officer had transmitted a threat contact report to 7th Fleet and to the Combined Forces Command Operations Center in Seoul at 7:51 a.m. The response that came back 11 minutes later confirmed what he already knew. The nearest U.S. Navy surface combatant capable of providing direct protective support was 93 minutes away at maximum speed. The nearest air support from a U.S. installation in South Korea was approximately 40 minutes away under an authorization chain that had not yet been fully exercised. The vessel was, for the immediate tactical window, operating without direct protective cover in a waterway with 3 armed contacts closing from the north. The towed array continued its collection mission. The commanding officer did not order the array recovered. Recovering the towed array, a process that takes between 40 and 90 minutes depending on sea state and the care with which the cable handling equipment is operated, would have signaled to any surveillance asset watching the vessel that it was preparing to maneuver or withdraw. The collection mission was why the vessel was here. The contacts closing from the north were attempting to make it stop being here. Recovering the array was a form of compliance with that attempt, and compliance was not among the commanding officer's available options under the rules of engagement and the standing orders governing freedom of navigation operations in this area. At 8:03 a.m., a fourth contact appeared on the surface plot. Bearing 320 degrees, range 36 nautical miles. This contact was moving on a southeast heading, approaching from the northwest, the opposite quadrant from the first 3 contacts. Classification took 4 minutes due to the contact's unusual approach angle relative to the vessel's radar coverage geometry. Najin-class frigate. KPA Navy's largest West Coast surface combatant. The Najin carried a weapons loadout that included surface-to-surface missiles, anti-aircraft artillery, and a deck gun configuration that, while dated, was capable of effective fire at ranges the current geometry would shortly make tactically relevant. Track Delta. 4 contacts, 3 from the northeast and north, 1 from the northwest. The geometry was now unambiguous to any watch officer with a surface warfare qualification and access to the same tactical plot the commanding officer was looking at. Track Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie were the forward element, fast missile boats closing to engagement range from the bearing arc most directly ahead of the vessel's current heading. Track Delta was the blocking element, coming from the northwest, to close the withdrawal vector that represented the most direct route toward the Yellow Sea's central corridor and the open water beyond the KPA Navy's declared patrol boundaries. The formation was designed to enclose. It was designed to present the surveillance vessel with a complete geometric envelope, armed contacts within engagement range on all practical approach and withdrawal vectors, and to use that envelope to make the continuation of the intelligence collection mission physically untenable without creating a situation where the U.S. vessel's only response was either a capitulation or an escalation that the KPA could characterize in whatever terms served its immediate interests. The communications officer had been transmitting on bridge-to-bridge channel 16 since 7:58 a.m. The transmissions identified the vessel by type and mission category, declared its legal status in international waters under the provisions of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and requested all approaching contacts to maintain safe navigation distances consistent with international maritime regulations. The transmissions were professional, clear, precisely worded, and completely accurate in their legal characterization of the situation. They were also, as every person on the vessel understood, almost certainly not going to produce a response from a naval force whose government had a 30-year documented record of disputing the legal framework being invoked. No response came from any contact on any frequency. At 8:09 a.m., Track Alpha had closed to 11 nautical miles. Its missile launchers were now detectable on the ocean surveillance vessel's forward electro-optical camera as angular structures on the contact's deck profile. The P-15 Termit anti-ship missile has an effective range of approximately 40 nautical miles in its baseline configuration. Track Alpha had been within theoretical weapons employment range for the previous 6 minutes. The fact that it had not fired was not a conclusion about its intentions. It was a statement about the current phase of the operation, which was encirclement rather than immediate kinetic engagement. The KPA command wanted the vessel inside the envelope before it made its next decision about what to do with it. The P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft that had been scrambled from Kadena Air Base in Japan at 8:02 a.m. as soon as the initial threat contact report had been processed through 7th Fleet and the authorization chain had been exercised, was now 27 minutes away from the operational area. Its crew had been briefed on the contact picture in flight and was flying at maximum cruise speed on a bearing that would bring it overhead the ocean surveillance vessel at approximately 8:36 a.m. 27 minutes was a long time in the geometry of this situation. The commanding officer was aware of this with the specific awareness of someone who has calculated the timeline and found it uncomfortable. At 8:14 a.m., 7th Fleet authorized direct radio contact between the ocean surveillance vessel and the P-8 crew for real-time tactical coordination. The aircraft crew established the secure link at 8:14:22 a.m. The first exchange was brief and operational. Current contact ranges, bearings, speeds, weapons classifications, estimated time to minimum safe separation distance. The P-8's electronic intelligence officer was already collecting emissions data from the KPA contacts at long range. The Najin-class frigate's fire control radar had been intermittently active for the previous 20 minutes, its emissions consistent with tracking mode rather than terminal engagement mode, but present and logged. At 8:17 a.m., Track Alpha closed to 7.4 nautical miles and activated its own targeting radar. The emission was brief. 4 sweeps at fire control power, each sweep lasting 1.2 seconds, then shut down. The electronic warfare officer aboard the ocean surveillance vessel logged the activation with timestamp accuracy and transmitted the data to the P-8 and to 7th Fleet simultaneously. 4 sweeps of a targeting radar from a missile boat at 7.4 nautical miles, followed by shutdown, is not a launch sequence. It is a ranging exercise. It is a measurement of the solution quality available at the current geometry. It is a vessel's fire control system telling its crew, at this range, against this target, the solution is viable. The system recorded that conclusion and then went quiet because it had completed the measurement it was sent to make. The deck of the ocean surveillance vessel, riding in the moderate swell of the morning yellow sea under a sky that was flat and gray from horizon to horizon, transmitted the low vibration of its own propulsion through every surface the crew came into contact with. The towed array cable extended astern into water that the ship's own acoustic systems were sampling for the signatures they had come here to record. The mission was still active. The commanding officer had not ordered it stopped. At 8:22 a.m., Track Charlie, the Soju-class patrol vessel, maneuvered to a position 3.2 nautical miles off the ocean surveillance vessel's starboard beam and matched speed. transitioning from an approach vector to a parallel tracking course. It was no longer closing. It was pacing. It was a vessel positioned close enough to observe everything that happened aboard the ocean surveillance vessel, with optical and radar systems, and close enough that its own weapons had been within engagement range for the previous 8 minutes, but which was currently configured to watch rather than act. The presence of a shadowing vessel at 3.2 nautical miles was its own form of pressure, not kinetic, not threatening in any documentable sense, but physically present in a way that made the continuation of normal operations feel like a performance being conducted for a hostile audience that was both taking notes and holding options. The ocean surveillance vessel continued its collection pattern. At 8:31 a.m., Track Delta, the Najin frigate, had closed to 14 nautical miles from the northwest and activated a continuous mode fire control radar. Not the brief measurement emissions from Track Alpha, but a sustained tracking activation that placed a live targeting solution on the ocean surveillance vessel's hull and held it. The emissions were collected by the vessel's electronic warfare suite and by the P-8, now 9 minutes away, whose electronic intelligence officer was building a complete emissions record of every radar active in the operational area with the systematic thoroughness of a crew that understands their data products will be used to update the intelligence picture for the next 6 months. A sustained fire control radar activation from a vessel at 14 nautical miles is a different kind of communication than a brief ranging exercise. It is a continuous statement expressed in electromagnetic energy. The weapon solution is live, it is current, it is being maintained, and it will remain available for application at any moment the command authority decides to exercise it. It does not require a launch order to communicate its meaning. The meaning is in the activation itself, in the duration of the activation, and in the fact that it is being applied to a vessel that has no comparable active defense system to which it can respond in kind. The commanding officer composed his second threat contact update to 7th Fleet at 8:32 a.m. The transmission was factual and complete. Track Alpha at 6.9 nautical miles, Track Bravo at 9.1 nautical miles, Track Charlie at 3.2 nautical miles in parallel tracking, Track Delta at 14 nautical miles with continuous fire control radar active. P-8 ETA 7 minutes. Towed array collection ongoing. No course deviation from assigned operating pattern. Awaiting further guidance on protective asset deployment authorization. At 8:36 a.m., the P-8 Poseidon arrived overhead at 18,000 feet. The effect on the tactical picture was measurable and immediate. Track Delta's continuous fire control radar shut down at 8:36:41 a.m., 41 seconds after the P-8's radar altimeter data confirmed it was on station and its own sensor suite activated at full output. The Najin frigate's commanding officer had received the same kind of notification from overhead that every IRGC captain in the Persian Gulf had received when a maritime patrol aircraft appeared in the geometry above his vessel. The collection picture had changed. The assets available to the opposing force had expanded, and whatever decision chain had been active before the aircraft arrived now had a new variable in it. Track Alpha reduced speed at 8:37 a.m., its closure rate dropping from 28 knots to 14 knots, transitioning from active approach to a slower-paced proximity pattern that maintained its current range of 6.8 nautical miles without closing further. The missile boat was no longer executing its closing approach. It was holding position. Track Bravo continued on its approach vector for another 4 minutes before also reducing speed. It held at 8.1 nautical miles. The P-8's crew established communication with the ocean surveillance vessel's Combat Information Center at 8:38 a.m. and began a coordinated tactical picture exchange, combining the aircraft's high-altitude radar picture and electronic intelligence collection with the vessel's towed array data and surface surveillance picture into a single merged product. The merged picture showed 4 KPA contacts in a partial encirclement geometry. Partial because Track Delta's withdrawal to the northwest, which had begun when the Najin reduced speed at 8:39 a.m. and began a slow turn to the northwest, was gradually opening the corridor between the vessel and the open Yellow Sea to the south. Not a complete withdrawal, a repositioning. The frigate was moving from its blocking position on the northwestern withdrawal vector to a more distant surveillance position, ceding the geometry it had taken 40 minutes to establish. At 8:44 a.m., Track Charlie, the shadowing Soju vessel at 3.2 nautical miles, began to increase its separation distance. Its speed increased from the pacing rate it had maintained for 22 minutes to a rate that produced a gradual opening of the beam range. At 8:47 a.m., it had opened to 4.8 nautical miles. At 8:51 a.m., 6.7 nautical miles. It was not departing. It was simply no longer pacing. The P-8 crew established a low-altitude pass at 1,200 feet directly over Track Alpha at 8:53 a.m., a deliberate close-range observation run that produced detailed imagery of the missile boat's weapons loadout, deck configuration, crew positioning, and emission status. And that also communicated to Track Alpha's commanding officer with the physical unambiguity of a large maritime patrol aircraft passing directly overhead at 1,200 feet that the decision he had been holding for the previous 40 minutes about whether to press his approach within weapons employment range had been assessed by a crew with better situational awareness than his own, and that the assessment was unfavorable to the approach. Track Alpha turned northwest at 8:54 a.m. Speed increased to 22 knots. Track Bravo held its position for 6 more minutes, stationary in the surface plot at 8.1 nautical miles, before also beginning a northwest turn at 9 a.m. The turn was slow and the speed was moderate, the turn of a vessel whose commanding officer had concluded that the geometry had been definitively resolved against the completion of the original mission, and who was executing the withdrawal with the deliberate pace of a command that does not wish to appear to have been forced. At 9:04 a.m., all 4 KPA contacts were on northbound or northwestbound headings with opening range rates. The encirclement that had assembled over the previous 80 minutes had dissolved. The ocean surveillance vessel maintained its operating pattern. The towed array continued its collection. The commanding officer transmitted a final contact status report to 7th Fleet at 9:06 a.m. All 4 contacts withdrawing. No current minimum safe separation violations, collection mission ongoing, P-8 maintaining overhead coverage. The collection continued until 2:30 p.m. when the assigned operating window concluded and the vessel began its transit back toward the Yellow Sea's central corridor. The towed array was recovered over the following 73 minutes in calm sea conditions. The acoustic data collected during the operational period, including the specific collection window during and after the KPA missile boat encirclement, was packaged for transmission to the Theater Intelligence Team at 4:15 p.m. The engagement report documented the full sequence with the precision that intelligence support operations require. 4 KPA contacts, 80 minutes from first contact appearance to final withdrawal. Minimum separation distance of 3.2 nautical miles, achieved by Track Charlie during its parallel tracking phase. 1 fire control radar targeting activation from Track Alpha, duration 21 seconds. 1 sustained fire control radar activation from Track Delta, duration 6 minutes and 41 seconds before P-8 arrival prompted shutdown. 1 P-8 low-altitude observation pass over Track Alpha at 1,200 feet, duration 44 seconds, followed by Track Alpha's withdrawal. 0 course deviations from the assigned collection operating pattern. 0 collection mission interruptions. 0 concessions. The costs were operational in nature rather than material. The commanding officer had spent 80 minutes in a situation where 4 armed vessels were in varying degrees of encirclement around a ship with a 25mm cannon and a towed array, and the primary assets available to him in that window had been a radio that no one answered, a legal framework that his adversary did not recognize, and the institutional decision made long before this morning that freedom of navigation in international waters is a right worth the discomfort of exercising it under pressure. The crew of the vessel understood this calculus with the clarity of people for whom it was not abstract. What the KPA contacts found in the Yellow Sea on this morning was a vessel that continued its collection pattern when approached by missile boats with active targeting radars. A vessel that transmitted its legal status on open frequencies and then continued what it was legally doing regardless of whether anyone acknowledged the transmission. A vessel that waited for its P-8 support to arrive without using the wait as justification for abandoning the mission that made the wait necessary in the first place. The acoustic record collected during those 80 minutes documented what the KPA's West Coast submarine fleet was doing in the hours after a ballistic missile test. That record has a value measured in the operational picture it provides to the commanders who will make decisions in this theater over the coming months and years. The cost of obtaining it was 80 minutes of encirclement, a fire control radar activation, and the specific weight that accumulates on a commanding officer's shoulders in the interval between when a threat contact appears and when support assets arrive. 4 contacts, 3 missile boats, 1 frigate, 80 minutes, 3.2 nautical miles minimum separation, 0 course deviations, 1 intelligence record that exists because the vessel that collected it did not stop collecting it when the collecting became uncomfortable. The ocean does not grant its secrets to the vessels that leave when the pressure arrives. It grants them to the ones that stay, maintain their pattern, and trust the doctrine that says the right to be here is worth the cost of demonstrating it.